the Youth Mentoring Program. I hope you all are doing well today. So we're going to get started. So if you can all shoot me an email saying that you are on this webinar, that would be great. Remember that you need to do that. That way I know that you're actually on the webinar. And then we're just going to do a little bit of updates, some upcoming things that are going on. So July 15th, the quarterly reports are due, as well as the OJJDP PMT reports and the narratives. And I will actually shoot out today or tomorrow the narrative sheet that Marlicia had sent you guys a while ago, but I'll send that out to you guys again because it needs to be done in that narrative Word document. So I'll be shooting that out today. So that's due July 15th. So please remember to submit on that day. And then also we have the individual doodle calls that will occur, the week and a half after that. So that's July 16th to the 24th. Please sign up if you haven't done so already, and double check and make sure that you can actually do that doodle time. I'll be sending out calendar invites soon. So if you can't make that time, please go back on there and click a different date and time. But I will be sending out calendar invites. That way everyone receives them, and we'll do those calls, during the call times that you have. Also, there is going to be on July 1st an OJJDP PMT Q&A session. So in case you have any questions, you can access that. I'll be sending that out as well. So just like a Q&A section that they will be having. So we'll be sending that out as well as the slides and the recordings to the webinar. And the webinar is being recorded, so just so you guys know that, and I'll be sending that out as well. Please use the chat box session as well if you have any questions, or use the raise a hand feature because we'll be having a Q&A section towards the end. Great, and now I'm going to forward it on to Father Reagan.
Hello, everybody. It was great to be with you all, a couple of months ago, and so during that day, we had a great chance to kind of get some good information about trauma-informed or trauma-responsive care, and so I'm pretty psyched to be able to kind of talk a little bit about the second aspect of it. But I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. So basically, does anybody have any sort of insights or feedback about how it's going? And is there any sort of question that you would like to see particularly addressed today? But hopefully we'll have some questions or thoughts there at the end of our time here together today. So basically, now we can go to the next slide, and we're going to see that we're just going to basically take just a couple of minutes to review our first session just briefly. So, so the next slide. Basically, just a reminder that this overarching approach to trauma-informed care or trauma-responsive care is just basically a paradigm shift from asking the question from what is wrong with you to what has happened to you. It's a paradigm shift. Rather than we're looking at the diagnosis and we're here to fix someone who has a broken issue in their life or someone who is broken or has some kind of thing, to focus on what happened to you, to see that there's been an injury in the person's past, and so we're trying to help that person recover from that injury. It's the same analogy of like if I came into the room with a broken arm, and my cast was on my arm, and no one would ever just say, what's wrong with you? They would say, hey, what happened to you? Did you fall down? What happened? So when we see the kids that are involved in the mentoring program, we're seeing them maybe behave in ways that aren't are maybe what we might call maladaptive, or we might call problematic. Or seeing kids with emotional expressions that might not be exactly within the middle of the bell-shaped curve of normal, or whatever we call normal. So then we're asking, well, gee, what's wrong with them? But that's not the question. We want to ask what happened to them and to help them try to get over that and to work through those issues. Then the second paradigm sort of shift is really from I'm in control. I'm in the mentor. I'm taking charge now. I'm at the driver's seat. I've got the wheel. Don't worry about it. You don't worry your pretty little head kind of thing. I'm going to take over. Really, that's not the approach, but more to collaboration. I'm going to work with you. I'm going to let you determine your own goals. I'm going to help you guide through this direction, this relationship that we're having. It's more collaborative. We're going to lock arms together and walk forward. So those are the two real kind of paradigmatic shifts from previous sort of ways of approaching things that is really grounded in a trauma-informed or trauma-responsive manner. So, our different people have talked about what trauma is, and so you can see these are three different definitions or perspectives on what trauma is. So you can see from the American Psychological Association, Psychology Today, and the Webster's Dictionary. So look at those three definitions of trauma, and just kind of reflect for a second and think, are those really kind of grounded in the paradigm shift that I just spoke of? Trauma, from the American Psychological Association, trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event. So it lists accident, rape, or natural disaster. I feel like that's so narrowing, and it's frustrating to me that the American Psychological Association uses that as its definition, because I feel like that trauma is, many ways can be developmental, it can be relational, it can be something that happens chronically throughout someone's life. There's many different perspectives. And the focus, I feel like, in this definition is not exactly so much on the person's reaction to the trauma, but more like looking at listing what the traumas are. Then the same thing with, I feel like, Psychology Today. And then I feel like also that you can see the Webster's Dictionary there, emotional problems listed in the definition. That kind of, again, focuses on the what's wrong with you rather than what's wrong with you. So I feel like maybe we can talk a little bit more about a better definition for ourselves. So we can go to kind of, this is the analogy that I always use. I feel like that trauma is something that occurs in a person's life. It could be a single event. It could be a cumulative events that have occurred throughout a person's life significantly, like through a relationship with a parent or something, or a relationship with some sort of supposed caregiver that compounds over time. But really, it's an event or a series of events that occurs to someone that overwhelms their system, their ability to be able to cope with stress or difficulty or adversity. So basically, I could compare it to be analogous to a flood. So say if we're in a city, like say we're just in like my hometown of Knoxville, Tennessee. Knoxville's got a good water removal system, and so when it rains normally, the water moves out of the town. It kind of goes off the streets. There's no flooding, no backup. But then when there's a big, huge rain or a huge storm that we've been having recently, actually, and the water will back up. It backs up, and then that causes flooding, and the water removal system becomes overwhelmed because that system isn't built for that immense amount of rain and that kind of overwhelming rain all at once. So then, even though the water may subside eventually and we don't see any difficulties, yet still there are long-lasting difficulties. Like maybe there was damage from the flood, or maybe there's mold left over, or there's long-term maybe damage to a home or something like that at the foundation. So what happened to that town there is that the system was overwhelmed. That's what is happening to the human person when there's a trauma in our lives, is that the system that we have to take care of difficulty and adversity is overwhelmed, and then it has a lasting impact on our body. So I feel like that's the important thing for us to remember is that it's the reaction that we're talking about. Somebody could come in and say I was in a car accident, or somebody could come in and say that my father or mother had abused me, but that really, what happened really isn't the issue. It's what is my emotional response to it, and how am I dealing with it, how am I thinking through it, okay? Then I think that this is to remind us that we have a trauma response system. We have a danger response system. It's what to keep us alive. It's what keeps us going. So when our ancestors saw a tiger out in the woods, we get the energy to fight or flee, or to freeze, and to do something to try to respond to that. And then the body would go back to regulate to its normal level of functioning. That's what this system is built for. But the problem is that we know that the tiger sometimes can be in our homes and in our lives. And it kind of is always there for us. And that's just so damaging to the human person, to the human body, to be under that kind of chronic level of stress. Or even if something has occurred in our childhood, it still can continue to impact us throughout our lives. And maybe many times our body is still responding to an old trauma as if it's occurring today or in this very moment. So that tiger is kind of living in our house. And then when we're responding to that trauma all the time, then it's very difficult. Say, for instance, if you've got if you've had a very traumatic experience with somebody who's a superior or somebody who's in an authority figure, there's been some sort of trauma or abuse that's occurred in your past, maybe that will be triggered again and again whenever you're maybe exposed to a boss or to someone who's in an authority figure, or maybe even like a mentor that could ring that same bell. But if it's your boss, you're supposed to sit there at the table across the desk and meet with the boss, but yet your body is reacting to this fear of an authority figure, and so your body's telling you to run or flee or freeze, but yet you have to sit there and keep it together and engage with your boss as a normal human being would, but yet all this is going on. So this is the difficulty with us in our life today, that we have to deal with these kind of traumas and have to remain, you can't run or fight or flight kind of thing. So that's what's going on with us. So these types of traumas, as we talked about the last time, occur and they impact us throughout our lifetime. So if you think about it, the negative experience occurs maybe in our childhood. It could occur in our adulthood, but the kids that you all are working with are having adverse childhood experiences or traumatic experiences in their lives, which leads to some sort of physiological neurodevelopmental problem. So we could talk about this in terms of, we kind of gave a little physiological lesson the last time when we were here together, and how this cortisol is being released throughout our body in response to the stress, but yet there oftentimes is an overload of cortisol in the body, and then it prevents the system that releases the cortisol in the body. It prevents it from shutting down and stopping the cortisol from going through our body. So that ends up, it just keep going through it, and then there's damage to our body because of that overload of a chemical that's not supposed to be in there all the time. Basically, the cortisol is supposed to be just one shot to shoot you into and raise your heart rate and get your sugar level up to give you energy to be able to run from the tiger. But in many cases, the tiger's in our house, like I was saying, or in our neighborhood, then that cortisol is constantly shooting through our body, which dysregulates other systems of the body, leaving us really kind of feeling pretty frazzled or pretty bad, and then ending up leading to emotional problems, cognitive impairment problems, then leading to how am I going to deal with this pain or this stress? I'm going to adopt some health risk behaviors. I'm going to start using drugs. I'm going to start drinking. I'm going to smoke. I'm going to eat too much. I'm not going to eat enough. Whatever it is that ends up damaging our body, leading to disease, disability, and other problems, and then leading to an early death. So we see that this really could be talked about as a public health crisis or a public health problem. So that's kind of that. So just real quick, this stuff about how it impacts our brain. So this is going to be important for our discussion today. So I'm going to kind of refer back to a couple things. There's two portions of the brain that sort of are holding memory. The hippocampus, which is kind of up in that green area of the brain, that it's in there somewhere. And that hippocampus is basically when we're thinking about memories of emotional times. So maybe we could look back and have a memory of a time when we were a kid and it was Thanksgiving and our family was together and we felt happy. Or maybe we look back on a memory where there was a death in our family and we can remember that memory and remember how we felt about it. We remember how we felt at one point in the past about it. So that's the memory of emotion. Then the yellow part there has a thing called the amygdala, which is basically the alarm system, which holds memory, but really it's more of an actual emotional memory. Rather than just memories of emotion, it's emotional memory. So sometimes something will trigger that memory or that response, and then our body will go into the full-on fight or flight thing. And then this is what leads to the kind of the dysregulation and kicks in a part of the nervous system that makes us our heart rate go up and makes our behavior kind of maybe not so completely adaptive. So that's a little bit about what's going on with the brain there. So let's go back and remember that all the things that we've talked about here so far, that the systems of the ability to handle an issue or a trauma becomes overwhelmed. And so what do we do to try to respond to that? We're not psychiatrists prescribing medication. We're not doing that. But what we're doing is engaging with the clients. So basically, I say this phrase here: all practice rests on engagement. I feel like a lot of times, I teach in the College of Social Work at University of Tennessee, and when the students come in, I think they all want to learn some fancy, cognitive behavioral, dialectical behavior, whatever kind of thing they want to learn. But really, what has to happen is just that ability to engage with the client, the ability to be in relationship with the client. And that's what our mentors need to remember. I think it's important to have this knowledge about many of our kids, not what's wrong with them, what happened to them, and that this is a real physiological response to real events that have occurred in their lives. But what do we do to correct that? We are in relationship with them. We're in a collaborative, strength-based relationship with them. So anything that we do, all of it rests on the mentor's ability to engage with the client. So let's talk just for a couple of seconds about some of the things that have impacted these families and some of the factors that are involved with this. So when we think about some of these things, let me just, you can see what some of the important things that are on the board there, or on the slide there. Basically, just two that I want to highlight particularly, but you can see them there, and then you can read them because you'll be getting the PowerPoint. But basically, I think that guarded approach to the relational connection. I feel like that's one extreme that a family, so say a mentor's coming along and is making a relationship with the youth that's in their care. Sometimes a family may be very guarded or very distant and can make the mentor feel like that they're unwanted. Well, if you think about it, many families that have experienced trauma may have been some sort of invasion from someone externally, or there may be this fear of strangers, or something like that. So there may be a difficulty. So mentors may feel like, oh gosh, I don't think they want me around. Well, they may really want you around, but they just don't know how to express it. Or maybe just there's that initial guarded approach to things. So I think maybe something to encourage the mentors to realize is that if your family that you're working with feels like, you know, off-putting to you, please just remain content, remain strong, remain committed to the situation. It'll be important. And I feel like that attachment is a big issue for many people who have had trauma, and so attaching to a new person in the youth's life can be difficult and something that might be difficult to overcome. So I think it just is important to understand that. Then the second thing I kind of wanted to just highlight of these things that are on this slide is that one, the blue one, lack of willingness or capacity to verbalize or share historical events. So I think a lot of times, you know, you may talk to the kid, and you know, the mentor may have great memories of their childhood, or may have some painful memories of their childhood, and maybe want to talk to the youth about that, or maybe talk to family members about it. But oftentimes there's not a real clear memory. So remember how I was talking about those two parts of the brain, the hippocampus versus the amygdala. Some of the traumatic memories, or if you've lived in constant poverty through your life, that's a constant source of stress and anxiety. You know, some of those memories are tied up in the amygdala and aren't really easily accessible. So if somebody's talking about the past and you want to find out what's going on in the child's past, really, I wouldn't worry about it. I would encourage the mentors, just don't worry about trying to get a big old history on the client, but just to say, hey, I'm here now. Let's think about the present. Let's be where we are right now. So those are some issues that might be confronting some of the mentors, and might be something difficult to overcome. And those are two that I just highlighted. So let's talk about maybe what's the thing to think about getting over that. So maybe some things to better engage. This just can be a big test for the mentors, is to continue these four beliefs, these four factors of belief that the goal is worthwhile, that when I'm going to see my youth or going to spend the time with them, or the day with them, or whatever it is that they're going to do, that this time is going to be worthwhile. Even playing pinball together, or just playing cards, that it's worthwhile. The time that you're spending is worthwhile. That engagement is worthwhile. The relationship and attachment is significant. When we think about healthy people, we realize that many people have had a good, solid attachment in the early years of their life. And this mentor could be kind of like a chance to restart that attachment. So it's important that the time spent with the person is worthwhile. The next thing is that the process is valid. I don't know if some of your mentors might be super goal-oriented, like, hey, what are we getting out of this? I'm not seeing any change in the youth. Where are we headed with all this? But the process, it's the process. You know, we think about going on a hike. We want to get to the waterfall, or we want to get to the big vista at the top of the mountain, but we can't get there without walking and noticing the flowers along the way and not tripping on the rocks along the way of the path. It's the process that's so important, and it's a process that's valid. Just the relationship in itself is a great goal. Then the belief that the goal is attainable. I think that sometimes this just causes us to believe in the youth, to believe in the person, the dignity and worth of every person, which our faith as Catholics teaches us. So this is an important element to recognize the dignity of that person, and that they can attain the goals that are set before them. And I think it's also important to remember, what is the goal? If we set a goal for the person to go to Harvard and get a doctorate or something, well, no. But if we set a goal for the person to be able to do their homework and to maybe participate actively in a team sport, what is the goal that we're doing, and not make the goal out of reach? I think that belief that the goal is attainable is part of it, is defining attainable goals, and goals that the youth themselves has had a hand in developing. And then the last part there, believe that we as a provider, that the mentor, that the Catholic Charities agency that you're a part of is safe, respectful, and competent. And I feel like that's where it comes up to us, that we kind of know what we're doing. And that's all the work that you guys are doing in your situation, is to create that very competent environment for the mentor to be able to feel at home and feel safe. So, okay. Now we know that we've been doing this attachment, or I'm sorry, attunement, self-regulation, and competency is sort of the philosophy or the structure or the theory that we're working off of. So the ARC has some really important things to say about engagement as well. And some of the really important things are basically that the relationship is collaborative. I've said this about 18 times already, but I feel like can't say it enough, how important it is for the youth to have a say, that the mentor doesn't come in and say, I'm doing it all for you, or I'm dictating what we do, but what voice does the mentee have in the relationship? Super important. The second thing is the transparency. Nothing creates, I think, a lack of engagement or a block to engagement more than a lack of transparency. Like, what are we going to do today? Oh, don't worry, I'll tell you when we get there. That's not safe. That sets off the amygdala. That sets off that alarm system. Hey, where do you want to go today? Or what I was thinking was, let's go to the zoo and let's go to get some ice cream. Does that sound good to you? And then if the child said, really, what do you feel? Do you like ice cream or not? Yeah, okay, let's hear. So where they're collaborative, but also where it's transparent. And that's just kind of like from one example. I think transparency about what your motive is, what you know, as the mentor. I think that's another thing too. And then this whole thing about trust is a really important thing. I feel like for the relationship to be truly attuned, as we talked about the last time, there needs to be trust. And I think that's the deal about, like, from the outset, for the mentor to not say, hey, look, trust me, I'm in control here, I got it together, but to say, hey, look, I want to earn your trust. What can I do to best earn your trust? And again, that puts the youth in the collaborative relationship. What can I do to help you earn my trust? Because I want to earn your trust, and I want to be in a good relationship with you. So those are just some important things to think about as far as from the ARC perspective about engagement. So a couple of things, a little more from the ARC perspective is about a couple of engagement things here. Again, I've already said it, engage around the child's goals. Earlier, the belief that the goal is attainable is really important, but the goals have to be a buy-in from the child. And I don't know if, like, your grant, the Office of Justice grant there has defined goals that you're supposed to do, but how can you engage the child and maybe helping make those goals appropriate for that particular person? I think that's really, really important from a trauma-informed perspective and this ARC approach too. And then I think it's important to realize that I think sometimes mentors, I know, like, I was a mentor when I was in college for this kid, and you know, I like running, and so I was thinking, oh, well, we'll just do running. The kid will love it. That's, you know, I want just that one thing I'm interested in. Well, the kid that I was mentor of didn't care about running, so I had to kind of realize, well, look, here's a whole person. How do I engage the whole person? I wish I'd known this back then. Then the last thing, the third thing there, the yellow one, is about routines. And we talked a little bit about this last time. But let's try a little activity to kind of get this point across. Okay, if I could ask you to see if you could remember the numbers. I'm going to list a series of numbers, and see if you can remember them back. The numbers are 7, 3, 29, 14, 101, 6. Okay, can you remember those numbers? Maybe, maybe not. Okay, now some of you might have a difficult time with remembering some of those numbers. But okay, now I've got another set of numbers I'd like you to remember. Okay, ready? I'm going to list them out again. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Okay, can you remember those numbers? I'm sure you can, because there was a pattern to it. There was a series to it. It was predictable. We knew where it was headed. So that's important, I think, when we think about engaging with these youth, is that there's some sort of ritual or routine or pattern to what's happening. So that maybe every time the mentor isn't picking the youth up and it's something different, or some unexpected thing or something that the youth is unfamiliar with, that could tee up some sort of dysregulation. Okay, so let's go a little bit further. Okay, and then just remember that this whole thing that we're grounding our approach in is this attachment, self-regulation, and competency, the ARC. So that's what we're basing our thing in. And those were comments there that I just gave a couple slides about the engagement process, which is super important. Now let's take the next stage, which we talked last time about these three things basically. And we talked particularly about attachment and how important that element is. Today, we're going to talk a little bit more about the regulation or the self-regulation aspect of all this. We've got 30 minutes to do that. We can totally do this. So let's talk a little bit about the self-regulation, which is the next slide. So basically, why we want to focus on self-regulation within the context of a solid engagement, within the context of a solid attachment that the youth is engaging in, is that there's difficulty sometimes because emotions are a real part of our life, especially emotions in reaction to trauma or negative events that have occurred in a person's life. So basically, we have to learn and kind of encourage our youth to deal with these emotions and the responses to emotional life that we have. So basically, many people, especially traumatized kids, have a limited vocabulary around emotions and aren't able to really describe what they're feeling, what the experience is, or maybe they're afraid of emotions. So therefore, they're disconnected from the emotional experiences. So this is an example, in my therapeutic practice that I was involved in at the Cali Heritage Agency before. I remember, I'll never forget this. It was a woman that I was working with, and she was talking to me about an experience that she had. And I asked her, can you tell me about the sad feelings that you're having? Now, normally I didn't label a person's feelings, but she was obviously sad because she was crying. Tears were coming out of her eyes, and she was crying. And she said to me, oh, I'm not sad. I'm not really sad. This doesn't make me sad. And I said, can you explain? Then I wasn't trying to grill her. It makes it sound like it. But can you talk about the tears that are coming out of your eyes? What's going on? And she said, she felt her cheeks. She had to feel her cheeks and see that there were tears on her face. She was unaware that she was crying because she was so divorced from her emotional life. Now, that's what's going on with many of our clients. So that they're super divorced from their emotional life. Maybe not to that extreme, but that's just an example of what's going on with people. So that's another element of why self-regulation is so important. Then we think about the emotions that we have. If we're divorced from them and we don't have any vocabulary to be able to talk about them, and maybe we've tried everything we can to avoid them, we don't have any real adaptive way to express the emotional experience that we're having. That might have been beat down by our parents or by our caregiver in the past. You can't feel that. You can't get angry. Anger's bad. Why are you jumping up and down so happy about this? This isn't good, whatever. So then the emotional life gets kind of shut down and you just don't know how to express it. So then that leads to having too much control over your emotional life. I'm going to clamp it down. I'm not going to have emotions. So that leads to very flat affect and very little emotional expression. But where inside it's just churning you up because you're trying to keep control of it. Or you have too little control, which many is what we see. Anger takes over. Kids, running out of the classroom. Kids getting angry, hitting other kids. Things like that. Whatever the too little control is involved there. And then maybe try to engage in behaviors to regain control. And sometimes those behaviors can be maladaptive. They can be something where you're trying to gain control of your emotions by taking substances, or maybe locking yourself in your room, or maybe getting in fights, or whatever difficult things that go on there. So those are some of the things, some of this, I guess we could call symptoms or difficulties, or the response to what has happened to the child, is this divorce from emotions, and then therefore an inability to express them appropriately. So therefore, in comes the need for helping people regulate, or how to regulate these kids. So when we talk about emotions, we know that they're real. They're a physical part of the human body. It's a part of the person's life. So our role here is to help the youth to be able to regulate that, to be able to safely and effectively and appropriately express what's going on in their body. What am I thinking? What emotional experience am I having internally, and how do I get that out of myself and communicate it to someone else? And how do I kind of modulate that to be appropriate to the situation that I'm in? So this is important. So think about this analogy. You know, we all eat, of course, and so we all get hungry. So, you know, you think about this. If I've tried to suppress my hunger, which is a true, real physiological need that I have to eat food. So you think about this. If I try to suppress the idea that I'm hungry because I've been told it's bad to eat food or something like that, then I'm going to end up starving. And then when I'm starving, all I'm going to think about is food. And, you know, you think about at lunchtime, if you smell pizza coming from the cafeteria, you know, your mind is going to the pizza that's down there. So all you're thinking about is food. So you can't really engage in what it is that you're doing. It's the same thing with an emotional response. If I get angry and I'm told to clamp it down and not deal with it or not respond to how that emotion is driving me to respond, then all I can think about is how angry I am and whatever things are going on inside of me, and how am I going to keep control of this. Therefore, I can't engage in schoolwork. I can't engage in relationships. I can't engage with other people that are having whatever thing in my life I need to be engaged in. On the other end, you think about if I'm hungry and I'm sitting in my workplace, or I'm sitting in my classroom and I'm supposed to be sitting there learning, but I get up and start digging through a bag and chewing away at potato chips or something and disturbing everybody. And then you're like, why aren't you controlling your hunger? You know, lunch is going to be in another hour. Can't you just hold on to it? No, I've got to express it right now. I've got to feed that hunger right now. Well, that's disruptive and maladaptive there. So you can kind of see as hunger is sort of analogous to emotions that we have in our lives, and often responsive to traumatic events. Sometimes we clamp down too much and we can't engage because it's all we're thinking about. Sometimes we don't have any control over it, so we just dive right in and start getting angry or start crying or start giggling or whatever in an inappropriate time. So can you kind of see how, like, giving into the hunger is analogous to giving into an emotional life? Because it's a true physiological response we're having, but how do we express it? Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. Then basically this big picture of self-regulation. Overall, what we want to help our youth do is to increase the capacity to manage emotions and manage that physiological experience. So we don't want kids diving into the potato chips in the middle of the classroom. We also don't want them jumping up and standing on the desk and yelling at the teacher. We don't want them, running out of the classroom. We don't want them calling a kid another cuss word name or something like that. We don't want that going on. But we also don't want the kid to sit there shutting down their emotions and keeping themselves quiet, just, like that, so that you can't fully engage. So how do we do this? I feel like that some of the things here are building a language for emotion, building a language for energy, and building a language for bodily states. I think many times kids that are neglected really aren't in tune with their body. The thing about even just things like using the restroom or is it cold or hot? Things like that. It's okay to talk about, am I cold or am I hot? That's okay. But the same thing is, am I angry or am I sad or am I happy? To give a language for this, to be able to talk about it, to say, I'm cold right now, can I get my jacket? I'm angry right now, I need to step out and take a breather. Those are the same things we need to kind of like, what's the language and how do we ask for what we need about it? So I think the important thing is another thing there is to build capacity to recognize the states. You've got an emotional language, then how do I recognize that state that I'm having inside myself, and then how can I communicate it to others? And also to be able to recognize an emotional state in someone else. That's an important element of this regulation as well. Also, it's important to explore tools to better manage the experience. So maybe tools, there can be all kinds of tools, and we're going to talk about some of them in just a minute. So it's important to kind of, what are the tools that I have in my belt to be able to deal with or express these emotional states that I'm going through? Okay, and then another thing, increase communication resources. To me, the best practice of being able to learn to do something is just to do it. Just try it, do it. That's what the mentor can be. A sounding board, you know, a practice field for talking about emotions and talking about their bodily states, all that kind of thing. If there is a trusting relationship, if there is a collaborative relationship, that's where hopefully the youth can begin to talk about their emotional states and feel accepted and feel and get feedback on it. Okay, so then let's think about this thing about regulation. Now, on the slide right now is sort of an image of what I feel hopefully many of us are experienced through our life. There are kind of three different zones. So if you look at that little chart there, there's a -1 all the way up to +10. Now, if we think about +10 as like amped up, like there's energy, there's, I don't know, you're at the fair and you're on a ride or you're on a roller coaster and there's music playing and there's smells you're smelling from the popcorn popping and you're up and down on the roller coaster. That's a high level of energy and a high level of sensory input and a high level of emotion that can come along with it. But then you go down to 0 or -1, and that's basically maybe you're asleep or maybe you're just in your room all by yourself with the lights out and the doors shut. So those are the two extremes. But there in the middle is kind of just like, okay, I've got people I'm talking to. I'm in the cafeteria. There's a few people, some plates are clinking. There's some things going on. Things to look at, things to hear, things to smell. It's sort of in the middle. There's a little bit of a middle. So my cousins always have this thing that they joke about. If somebody's getting upset about something, they'll say, you're at a 10 and I need you at a 2. You're at a 10 and I need you at a 2. So that's always like code word. Like if somebody says, hey, look, I need you at a 2, we know I'm getting amped up and I need you to bring it down a few notches. So that's why I love this 0 through 10 thing. You know, hopefully we're at a lower level. And there's these basically within the 0 or the -1 to 10, there's kind of 3 different zones, I guess, that we could think about. There's a zone where we're comfortable. Like I like to be, like right now I'm comfortable. I like talking about this stuff. The room temperature is pretty perfect. You know, I got a couple good, nice people I'm sitting here with, and I'm talking to some really great people on the webinar. So that's pretty comfortable. That's a comfortable zone for me to be in. There's also another zone of safety. There's a safety zone. I need to be in this zone because I feel safe. This is a big issue for kids that have been through trauma. That safety is an important thing to discuss. That's another level. Do I feel really safe? And then the third level is there a danger zone? This is a zone that I cannot tolerate being in, that I can't be in at all. So hopefully, if we look at this, us on an average day, we're in that sort of greenish bluish area there around the 5, the 7 to 3 there. That's where we kind of want to be with our life. But if we look at the next slide, we can see that this is where it goes. We add in these uncomfortable but manageable, tolerable but we're aroused, are those 2 different areas. So say, for instance, let's talk about this. That maybe right now I'm in this green zone. I'm with my friends here at Cali Charities and the room's comfortable. But if I have to go outside in a little bit, you know, it's going to be really hot and maybe there'll be lots of traffic and there'll be lots of things going on here in DC because it's so busy. I mean, I can tolerate it, but my senses are definitely aroused, you know, because I'm out in that busy city that's here. But then maybe I have to go out and there's been a car wreck. And there's lots of sirens and there's lots of traffic and it's even worse and people are afraid and there's nervous. Are we ever going to get? I'm already late. What am I going to do? That's really uncomfortable, but I can manage it. So this basically, we like to think about this as sort of the comfortable zone. We want to think about how can I work? What can I do to get back down to that comfort zone? Okay, that's really important. And if we kind of want to go back to this, this geeky me talking about the physiological responses, there's this homeostasis that our body is constantly trying to get us to. That green area is the homeostasis, where all our nervous system is kind of working as it is. Our heart's beating just fine and things are going along just right. That's the homeostasis. But if we go to the next slide, we can see there's this thing called allostasis, where our body is out of homeostasis because we feel like we're in a danger zone. We feel like we're in a dangerous spot. We're worried, we're scared, we're nervous, whatever it is that's going on. And that allostasis is kicking in and kind of causing our heart to beat, causing, you know, the cortisol to rush through our body. The body's out of whack. We're dysregulated. So if our body's out of whack, we're feeling and we're in a danger zone, that we're distressing. So therefore, we're going to react out of that. We're going to behaviorally respond in a lot of different wacky ways, whatever. So we're going to end up doing a lot of things that might not be that adaptive. This is dysregulation of the body's least internal experience, which is going to lead to dysregulation in behavior. So we're going to do all that we can to try to get out of the situation. There was a kid at our group home at Catholic Charities of East Tennessee where I worked before, and there was a boy, he would get in this, if things would get too loud or too rowdy, it would be too much for him, then he would be kind of in that danger zone. Well, what he did, rather than kind of leaving the room, he would start taking his clothes off. Eventually, he would just start taking his shirt off, taking his t-shirt off, you know, all that, like, what's happening here? Oh, I see what's happening. He's dysregulated, doesn't know how to handle the danger, but to shed the clothing there. So that we had to learn different ways to deal with that. So now notice where the red kind of is, where that danger zone is. It's 3 and above. So this can happen with some kids where the danger zone is where there's a lot of noise, there's a lot going on, that they can't handle all that stimuli. So therefore there's the danger zone there. Now if we look at the next picture, some kids have the situation where, oops, we're having all kinds of, there we go. So this one, some kids have difficulty when it's silent or when it's quiet, that I just can't be in a quiet, you know, kind of solace place, like I can't be in a dark room. This could be because of a trauma that has occurred in the past. That could be because the amygdala bell gets rung, that the allostatic load starts kicking in when there's silence and when there's, because I know, like, there was a client I was working with that she knew when it was like the calm before the storm. In her house, when things were quiet after work, that she knew she could hear the mom in the kitchen and then clinking, putting ice in her glass. She knew that it was the calm before the storm, and that her mom was going to get drunk and get abusive and violent. And so that quiet place made her very nervous. So she became very anxious and very aroused when there was quiet in the environment. So that can happen. So then sometimes some people are creating this, their safety zone is where things are loud and noisy and they're running around and creating problems. Because you think, well, why is a kid creating such difficulty in their life? Well, it's because the quiet, dark room or whatever is unsafe. I need to be where there's lots of loudness, and I need to create that in the classroom, in the relationship that I'm in. Hopefully that makes sense there. Okay, so then looking at this next one. Now this is many of our kids, where there's no safety in quiet, there's no safety in the loud noise, and so there's a very slim band there. So a lot of our kids that we're dealing with are going to have the regulation a very, very narrow line. So I think sometimes the mentors need to know this, that if things get too quiet, then they're going to start disrupting. If things get too rowdy, then they're going to start getting disrupted. And so I think it's important there to kind of start talking about it and to get the feeler of what the kid, where is the comfort place? Where is the safety place for the kid? And how can we begin to expand that safety place so it becomes a comfortable place? That's kind of the green thing. How do we do that? Well, we've got 10 minutes to talk about three things here, 3 quick things. Affect identification. What's the language and the ability to recognize the emotion? Modulation, which is how can I not only recognize the emotion that I'm experiencing, but how can I regulate it to where it's not always at a 10 or always at a 1, but where it's a 3 or a 4 or a 5? How can I modulate it so it's appropriate to the situation that I'm in? And then to be able to express it effectively. So let's talk about affect identification for just a second. Basically, the thing here is an awareness of the internal experience, that we're trying to help people understand what's going on and to be able to identify it and to have a language to talk about it. So just a couple things to think about here. The attunement and that engagement that the mentor is having with the youth is going to be really helpful, because if the client is beginning, or the youth is beginning to feel comfortable and they feel like they can start expressing an emotion, that's where the caregiver or the mentor can come in and kind of talk about, I see that you're angry now. Can you talk to me a little bit about it? And the client, maybe they might say, I'm not angry, or, you know, I'm gonna kick your butt. I'm not in this, you know, we've heard all those things from kids before, you know, things like that. So how do we help them understand, hey, look, what I'm hearing from you is anger. This is called anger, you're angry. And sometimes it's even that most basic kind of conversation with youth. I know that the mentors aren't therapists, but they hopefully have some awareness of their own emotional life and then can be able to recognize that. And to not be afraid of it in the youth. Not to be afraid when the kid isn't feeling safe and that they start acting out and emotionally kind of letting it all out all over the place. That's important to just recognize, not to be afraid of it. Hey, let me sit with it. Let me sit with the client in this emotional response. Not label anger as bad, not label sadness as bad, but just to be able to say, this is what it is. You're experiencing this. Let's walk through it. I think it's also important to recognize cultural influences. Different cultures experience different emotions in different ways. So I feel like sometimes are more free with their emotions, some are more reserved with their emotions. I feel like that's an important thing to kind of talk about or just to be aware of, is the cultural influence. And then I think also is how is the mentor engaging with the people who are already in the youth's life? Does the mentor understand a little bit about affect identification within the family system? And that might just be something to be aware of, just for the mentor to know about. And I think it's important also to choose your moments. I think if a kid's like standing up in their chair screaming and yelling, you know, using cuss words at you, that's probably not the time to say, can I talk to you a little bit about your anger right now? No, that's not it. I think it's important to choose the moments. And I think that's important for the, again, based on the attunement, being in tune to what the client is experiencing. Now, this to me is a great little tool. This phrase, halted. Are you hungry? Are you angry, lonely, tired, embarrassed, disappointed? What's going on? Let's talk about these basic emotions. You know, that's that little card that you could put in the kid's pocket, or maybe like the mentor could carry a little card that has the word halted on it, or maybe a fancy thing that they could decorate together that says halted, and that would always pull that out. What are you feeling right now? Is it angry? What's going on? What are you feeling? Are you lonely? What's going on? So I feel like that this could be a great place to start, just to kind of begin with the basics. We've all been hungry. What does that feel like? So let's talk about that. Okay. Then a couple of other things that we could do as far as this deal about affect identification or emotional identification is the deal about validating. And we've got a fancy word there, psychoeducation. That doesn't mean educating psychos. It means that like you're involved with educating the person about what's going on in the physiological life. I think to me, for the mentor to this youth, is just to say, this is normal. You know, your body's responding. You know how your body gets hungry? Well, your body tells you that you're angry. You know how your body tells you you're tired? Well, your body tells you that you're sad. It's a physiological response, so that you're normal, that it feels normal. And depersonalized. That it's not my psychic problem that I get angry, it's a physiological response. And I think it's also important to identify the situation that the person is in, that it's not your fault, it's not you that is getting angry unreasonably. I'd be angry too if I was in this situation. I think that's a really important thing, that, you know, when a kid goes to the playground and something happens to them, well, that playground might be something, or might be a trigger for them. It's important to recognize the situation. Also, self-monitoring. I think that kind of comes from, like always, how are we doing? How are we doing right now? Are you in tune with what's happening? Now, the fourth one there is really important. Is the mentor caring for themselves? Are they able to care in a way for themselves and get a breath from self? Are they able to talk to somebody about what they're feeling about the mentee? What's going on? That's really, really important. Okay. All right. So some primary targets for this identification become the language, connection, and context. So basically, the language is, what are the words that I'm using? And I think that halted thing is really important. And then to be able to connect. Okay, I'm connecting this feeling of anger to the situation that I'm in. So being able to draw a line. In fact, even like a discussion about this. Do you get angry when do you get angry the most? Well, I get angry the most when I'm at school. Oh, I wonder what that is. Let's talk about the connection there. So the kid begins to recognize the situation that the anger that it is eliciting the anger, and being able to draw a connection to that, and then drawing a connection to thoughts and behaviors that flow from this. And then I think, again, also looking at the context, understanding the experiences that elicit these emotions and the arousal around it. So being able to draw that strong line of the connection between the experience that you're having, the situation that you're in, being able to have language to talk about it, being able to have the awareness to realize the connection, and then also to be able to talk about the context in which the person is in. Okay? Now, here's just another little example of like ways that you can help somebody kind of connect. This is something that the mentor could do with the mentee. I don't know how old they are, and they may think this is silly or dumb or whatever, but maybe there's younger kids, or maybe there are kids, to kind of talk about maybe drawing different emotions and pulling them out, pulling out the emotional card, you know, when you've got it, and put it in a different box or something, or something like that. Some just thing that they could do together just to talk about emotional states. And then kind of say, now, right now I see that you're frowning. Let's look at that. What kind of emotion is that connected to? so that people are able to draw that connection and to identify the feeling. Okay. Here's another little example, I think, and this kind of builds on the next step, which we're going to talk about briefly, is the idea of modulation. So you can kind of see, look, there's all those different emotions that one child has drawn. And he says, I get cupcakes and I got to eat ice cream. So that's where they're feeling pretty good energy right there in the middle, and they're feeling happy. They colored in the happy. So they could use that kind of card thing that they've made themselves, and they've expressed it themselves. I feel like we might make our own kind of form or something like that, but that could look sort of cold. And I think this is a way to have the child kind of engage in their own ability to be able to express their emotions too. So I think that that's an important thing. So I love that. I love that little thing of being able to, hey, what's a little kind of report card for yourself on your emotions, or what's a little table that we could use to draw for ourselves, and then have the child kind of report on that and talk about that. Hey, after our time this afternoon, let's get our little sheet out. See what emotion are we feeling now? Oh, I'm sad that our time is over, but I was happy when we had the ice cream, something like that. Another tool that's on the next one is this thing about tell me, where are you sad? Where do you feel sadness? What is your body experiencing right now? And you can use like little figures like that to draw it in. I've used that a million times with clients, adults and youth. And it's really helpful. I think so many people, that's where so many people have stomach problems, and you have so much issue around the stomach, or maybe back problems. You know, you can kind of see different things. Where is the energy? Where is your emotion lying in your body? Okay. All right, just this thing about triggers. We talked about this when we were all here together. Just to remember that if somebody has been triggered, it's important to remember the context and the situation in which they're in when an emotion has been elicited. It could be a trigger to something that occurred in their past where their system became completely overwhelmed. So this is a thing. I think what's important to remember is that a trigger can yield a flashback, which comes with it emotional responses. But then sadly, the emotional response can also be a trigger, and then it becomes a cycle or a cyclic process. The trigger yields a flashback and an emotional response. The flashback and emotional response becomes a trigger. Then that trigger then furthers the flashback, furthers the emotional response, furthers the response as a trigger. So it can become, so how does the mentor then insert themselves into that cycle? And I think that's important to ask. What are you feeling? Talk to me about it. Let's get it outside of yourself so that you're engaging and inviting me into the experience. Okay. So let's talk real quickly about modulation before we wrap up, because I know we got to wrap up here in just a second, but we can't get away without talking about modulation. Okay, so I feel like the deal is trauma drives us as human beings to extremes. It drives us to the 1 and it drives us to the 10. If you think about it, our system has been overwhelmed, so I'm going to go as far to the one end as I can get. I'm going to go to as far to the other end as I can get. So this deal about driving us to the extremes, trauma often does that. How do we help our clients or our youth find the middle? So one thing that I've done with clients, and this could be something that mentors could be a little silly activity, is to put 4 bean bags there together, like just in a straight row. There's 4 of them. If there were 5, we could say the one that was in the middle, the third one would be the middle. But with 4, you have to kind of do some critical thinking and thinking through, where's the middle in these 4 bean bags? Between here, in this lineup here, where's the middle? And maybe somebody's sitting at one angle and they see the middle from a different perspective. It's just important to raise that discussion of, wow, you know, when you get angry, it's okay to be, you know, sort of angry or sort of frustrated. You don't have to go to 10. You don't have to start throwing things to express your feelings. You can be somehow modulated within that. So this is where modulation is encouraging a regulation of the physiological and emotional experience so that you can have a comfortable sense of arousal. If I get angry to the point where I want to kick and hurt people all the time, if that's my only experience of anger, no wonder I don't like anger. No wonder I don't want to be angry ever. I think it's really important to recognize that anger can be something that we experience within a relatively comfortable state, kind of in that yellow in that column we were looking at a few minutes ago. So I feel like it's important for us to discuss the issue of modulation. At what level are you comfortable expressing your anger? Can you pound on a pillow and get some of it out? What's going on? So I feel like what happens here for us with this modulation thing is giving in down regulation strategies and up regulation strategies. So maybe a young person has been sitting in front of the TV and his mind is just sort of just sort of really low, really, kind of lethargic or whatever. And then in comes the mentor. Hey, we're going to go out and we're going to take a walk. We're going to go out and get some fresh air. How are you going to appropriately upregulate the child from kind of 0 up to around 5? So, maybe you kind of move in slowly rather than coming in as gangbusters. Hey, here we go. You've been sitting on the couch all morning. What are we going to do now? Well, I think it's a gradual upregulation that we need to think about. Then the downregulation. Say we've been out having a blast. We've been having a good time, and the kids' emotions are up, and things are really running. It's a lot of fun, a lot of activities, heart's beating. It's a lot of fun. But how are we going to bring that person back down? I think it's, you think about when, I know as a runner, if I just was out running like a 6-mile run and then all of a sudden stopped and then got in my car and sat down, my heart would still be pounding. My body would be thinking, what are you doing? You abruptly stopped. It's too much. It's the same thing with some of these activities. Maybe talking to the mentors about how do we kind of gradually step down from a high energy activity or a highly emotional experience down to where there's kind of a transition. So I feel like this is important for us to think about that type of thing. Okay. All right. Well, since let's skip on over to the next couple of slides here. Now let's think about the language again around emotional response: anger, sadness, happiness. But then there's also small, medium, and big emotions that we're having. So we could talk about those though. What are the things that give us big happiness? What are the things that make us sort of medium happy? What are the things? And talk about that stuff. You could just have those conversations. Those are easy conversations. We can look at one more thing. Another little chart that a child could make. I blocked out some of the things there, but to think about like what's the status or what's my energy level. I was a 1 when we were doing one activity, and when I began it, but then when I finished it, I was at a 3. I was a 1 when we began beanbag toss, but now I'm at a 6. And then I was a 5 when I started this other thing, and it went up to a 10. How do we bring it back down? So I think that's important to just kind of put the language on it and let the kid be able to talk about it. Okay. Then another thing, how do we do this modulation deal, is how are we going to cope or express? Now, I know some kids might be thinking, well, this is dumb or this is weird or whatever. They might not want to do it. And I think you have to appropriate this to the particular use. It's to creating some kind of tool to help them express their emotions. And let them be the one to define it. So see that little box there? There's like a cush ball. There's some beads on a string. There's some kind of lotion that smells good. There's Play-Doh. There's different things that could be engaged to help the person kind of express the emotion and regulate the emotion where they are. Maybe me being able to put beads on a string takes one level of energy, one level of emotion, but throwing a cush ball is another level of energy. So maybe I can talk about, are you at a cush ball level of energy, or are you at the bead on the string level of energy? It can be just a language to talk about it. And it can be kind of tactile, and you're bringing in not just verbal discussion about your emotions, but you're tying it to something physical and a physical activity, which is really helpful and could be something that the mentors could do with their kids. Okay, and I think it's important to remember that regulation rests on this foundation of support that the mentor is offering, and the mentor has to have a toolbox there. They have to have some routines that they're in, rhythms that they're working with. Remember that 2, 4, 6, 8. Maybe there needs to be a particular pattern that the mentor is following with the kids, so the kid knows what to expect. Maybe there's some ongoing safe activities that they can do. Maybe there's some regulating strategies that the mentor has to help the person down-regulate or up-regulate. And then I feel like this line about being a detective. You have to figure out, what is it that triggered this kid? What is it that's making this emotional response that the youth is having? What's happening with them? And how am I going to be able to figure this out so that they can be able to understand what it is that's kicking in this emotional response? Okay, and then we can go, I guess we'll just kind of go, we don't have time for, are we done? Does anybody have another, we have another minute or two?
Well, we are right already.
We're late already. Yeah. We're 6 minutes over.
But if we lose some minutes.
Can I just show this one little video? Can I show the one quick video?
But everybody's still there, tuned, so we can.
Okay. So this is just one little video to that could be worth discussing, and I just got it off of YouTube, but I think it's a little quick, just couple-minute video to show what a little bit about emotional regulation. Okay, and just so you know, that third thing, affect expression, you know, the more modern approach or the more current approach to the, oh wait.
Few mid-wells, please, it's
Okay.
after 10.
Can I set it up for a second?
Excuse me.
Okay, so this is from that movie Terms of Endearment. And so the mother there is caring for her daughter who's very sick and in the hospital. And you can tell it's a little bit older because of those crazy hats the nurses are wearing. But so this is her expression of her nervousness about the daughter not getting her shot.
It is after 10. Give my daughter the pain shot, please. Mrs. Greenway, I was going to. Oh, good. Go ahead. Just a few mid-wells, please. It's after 10. It's after 10. I don't see why she has to have this pain. Ma'am, it's not my patient. It's time for her shot. You understand? Do something. All she has to do is hold out until 10. It's here. You don't understand. Get her the shot. You understand? Go ahead. Yes, my daughter the shot. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So you can see there that that was a dysregulated person, but I think that you could kind of see what was going on there. I feel like that the first nurse could see that I felt like that the actress's heart rate was going up. She was breathing heavier. You could see it coming, and so I feel like that could have been a great opportunity to kind of like, okay, let's work on this right now. You know what's going on. I feel like we see the signs coming sometimes in our youth, and so what are we doing about it? And so that's an example of dysregulation, and I think that how do we help the person appropriately express their emotion to the situation that's modulated. Okay, so then I guess that's that. So we have another, I think one more slide. Oh, we don't have time for that. I think, oh, there's a case study and all this. I overscheduled. But I don't know if there's any questions or anything that we'd like to ask. If you have another minute or two, I'm willing to stick around. I don't know if we want to open the line if there's a question or two, or is there one that we would type in, or how should we do it?
Well, let's see. We have a lot of comments, and those are mostly asking about the audio and the recording. And Jess, we will follow up. We will send a follow-up email with the recording and the slides of the webinar. Of course, we'll edit the portion where we got disconnected. And also, we have a question for Christy. She's asking us, what do you think about the mindfulness?
Oh, absolutely. I think mindfulness is all over is evidence-based. It's research focused, and what we mean by mindfulness is basically an awareness. And I think that's what we've been talking about through this whole thing. And this affect identification is an awareness. That if I can find a place where I'm mindful of the sounds I'm hearing, I'm aware of the smells I'm smelling, I'm aware of the taste in my tongue, I'm aware of what's around me, my state. That would be ideal. I feel like that there's people who have been successfully been able to engage in mindfulness strategies. There's been a reduction in depression, a great reduction in anxiety. There's a lot of that around that. There's an interview right now on Point that there's a podcast that you can get it on your podcast thing. On Point, it's an interview with John Kabat-Zinn. It's just like a 50-minute thing about mindfulness. It's pretty introductory level, but if anybody's not real aware of what mindfulness stuff is, that'd be a great place to start. So that's one thing. So definitely, I'm real big on mindfulness. I think like sometimes engaging youth with that type of thing, a mentor and a youth. Okay, let's go sit with our legs crossed and think about the universe. That's one thing. But then just saying, hey, that whole deal about bringing the person back to where you are right now in awareness. And I think that's what's happening a lot of times with our youth, that when there is an emotional reaction or a trigger gets triggered, they're going back into when the trauma occurred. They're not aware of where they are here and now. So I think just the mentor asking, hey, what's your favorite color? Do you see that color around us right now? What color is the sky to you right now? I like your jacket. How does that feel? Does that jacket feel smooth? To bring them back into some sort of an emotional awareness of what's going on right here and right now and around them. That's a really good thing, I think, about mindfulness, and it can be just an easy tool that a mentor can use.
Great. So another question, how do you suggest that this process begins when the child is so shut down and the relationship is just starting?
Oh, I think that's the great thing, that you've got this great whole future to have. And I think if the relationship is just starting, I feel like to remember that a lot of these things are further down the road, that emotional regulation may be way down the road. But the relationship that you're building, a trusting relationship, say the child is so shut down, there's a lack of an emotional response, I think just sitting and playing cards. The mentor could sit and watch TV, meet the client where they are. Their body, their physiological body has been harnessed or molded into being this shut down state that they're in. And it's not going to change overnight. So I feel like just being with the person where they are is awesome. And I think if we believe in that process, if we believe in that ability to just be with the person, kind of chuckle at something that's funny, cry at something that's sad, whatever you're able to do, just to be with the person, that initial steps of the relationship are really important. And I feel like, you think about this can be analogous to the human person. When a baby is born, there's a lot of goo-goo and all that going back and forth. That may feel like this is useless and this doesn't do any good, but wow, we know that nurturance and engagement with an infant leads to healthy outcomes for an adult. I mean, there's lots of research that indicates that. Same thing can be true in the mentor relationship with the client. Those early moments of the relationship, it may not be goo-goo, but it may be just sitting there quietly and not expecting something out of the person that they can't give. It's just, here, I'm going to meet you where you are. I hope that makes sense. That kind of analogous of the relationship, the mentor to the youth can be like a baby to their life. That you do this thing that may seem like it's not offering much, but you're just there with them, and it really, really truthfully does offer a lot.
Can you recommend a handout on mindfulness practices or on self-care strategies for youth?
Okay, something off the top of my head. That's something off the top of my head. Maybe we're going to send out an email with this. I'll send a link to a couple things.
I think that would be great.
Yeah, there's lots of great things. But you know what I would do? I would listen to that podcast from On Being. It's an NPR, I guess, thing. Meghna Chakrabarty is the interviewer. It's on point, and she's interviewing John Kabat-Zinn, and they talk about mindfulness, and they talk about it from a perspective of self-care too. It's about a 50-minute interview. It's good.
Great. So we'll send out the slides and the recording of this webinar, and with that, it has Father Reagan's contact information on it, and we'll get those good resources out to you guys. But yeah, thank you for signing on to the webinar. I hope that you enjoyed it, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you. And if anybody needs has a question like, hey, one of my mentors is having a hard time, whatever, I mean, I'd be happy to respond to that individually. If you ever you'll have my contact, you can email if you ever want to. Thank you. Thank you guys for participating.
Thank you.